What have we learned in the 2 years since we lost Roe versus Wade?
We have learned that the impact of overturning Roe versus Wade is far bigger than anything anyone imagined at this moment 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, we were talking about what this would mean for women who wouldn't have access to abortion, women who wanted to terminate a pregnancy. But think about the stories we've heard since then. As 10-year-old girls have come forward, 12-year-old girls, 15-year-olds, 30-year-olds who've been raped, as we've heard more from people who have wanted pregnancies but are miscarrying, who have something has gone terribly wrong in that pregnancy, of people who need access to IVF in order to have a family. We're hearing the stories of our sisters, our cousins, our friends, the people we went to school with. Shoot, we're hearing the stories from ourselves about what it means for an extremist group to drive access to abortion, to contraception, to IVF out of the American medical system. We are learning what it means person by person across this country. And I got to tell you, I'm out here in Wisconsin right now, and people are fired up to fight back.
What would it take to legislate Roe versus Wade, as pass it as federal legislation and get it signed into law?
Oh, I love this question because we are close. So what it will take is, first and foremost, we've got to have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. If we want to preserve access to abortion, then we've got to have Joe and Kamala. We also need a majority in the United States House of Representatives. We think we're close. We think we can do this, but it means we got to be in that fight. And the third one is we've got to have a majority in the Senate. We've got to have 50 Democrats who are willing to set aside the filibuster and say, your vote matters. We are going to depend on democracy, and we are going to make Roe versus Wade law of the land. Understand this, Lawrence. We are so close. Come November, if we can get those three parts, I think of it as the trifecta, we can make Roe versus Wade law of the land. Not just in blue states, not just in purple states, but all across this nation.
I've observed on this program that if there is another Trump presidency, it seems to me he would have very little difficulty in getting Clarence Thomas's resignation from the Supreme Court. He could go into a happy, well-funded retirement. Donald Trump could replace Clarence Thomas with a 40-year-old judge, possibly Judge Cannon in Florida, who could serve another 40 years on the Supreme Court. So it is entirely possible that another 40 years of rulings by the Supreme Court could be at stake in this presidential election.
Absolutely. And understand, that's Roe, that's contraception, that's IVF, but it is so much more. It's about voting rights in this country. It's about the ability to join a union. It's about our climate. It's about money in politics. It's about corporate power. It's about a Supreme Court that in the past few years has just jumped the curbs, a Supreme Court that has put itself above the Constitution, has put itself above democracy itself, and is driving an extremist agenda. It is absolutely critical that we reelect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, in no small part because they will be the ones to appoint the next round of Supreme Court justices, people who bring some balance back to the court, who will restore some credibility in that court, and who will make sure that we understand we are a nation of laws. Supreme Court has a role to play, absolutely. But so does Congress, and so does the President of the United States. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they are the people who will strengthen and support our democracy. And that includes taking this extremist Supreme Court, making sure that we've got better people in that court, and, in my view, expanding the court as needed, if this court is going to continue to try to run roughshod over our democracy.
As a former Harvard Law School professor, where, of course, you were talking about the work of the Supreme Court all the time in class, as you've seen the work of the Supreme Court for the last 2 years and prior in your time in the Senate, what has to happen to this court going forward?
Look, what's happened on this court most recently is truly deeply shocking. This is a court that no longer feels bound by law. It's also a court whose some of its members just feel like they don't have any ethical constraints, that they can take money from interested parties, that they don't even have to disclose what's going on. We need to do a couple of things in Congress. The first thing that we need to do is we need to put ethical rules in place that bind the Supreme Court. We have constitutional authority to do that, and we should do it. My view also is that it's time to expand the Supreme Court. The Constitution provides for that. It's happened 7 times in the past. We have a Supreme Court that is way out of balance. It's a Supreme Court that has become an extremist court that no longer limits itself to stare decisis. It no longer limits itself to the Constitution itself and to the power to be exercised by Congress and by the President of the United States. We need to save our democracy. And part of saving our democracy is making sure that this extremist Supreme Court does not destroy it.
Adam, you were in the courtroom. What about that tone?
Well, one thing in context for that, the thing that set Judge Cannon off before that was that David Harback, the prosecutor who she dressed down, was getting such a tough reception even before that moment that he had made a remark that he had barely gotten one of his points across. That was what made Judge Cannon make that remark. And for all of her tone policing, when he stepped down and Trump's attorney Todd Blanche came up, and you've seen Todd Blanche in action, Lawrence, he gave something that would be not out of place for a campaign speech for Trump, giving a view of the gag order as though this was a mere critique of the Biden administration and Biden's Justice Department. She didn't really push back on that remark. And on Friday, it was very different. You know, she had sharply pressed both sides. She had actually even questioned Trump's other attorney, Emil Bove, also a attorney on the New York criminal case, about his characterization of the special counsel as a shadow government. She said, I don't know if it's right to throw aspersions, she said to him, about his use of that term. Today, Blanche was throwing every aspersion in the book about Joe Biden's supposedly secret role in the gag order. In the search of Mar-a-Lago. There's absolutely no evidence of that, and didn't even push back on Todd Blanche's characterization of Trump's comments and the fact that they were lies.
Andrew, exasperation can happen in courtrooms, but of all the people in an American courtroom to be concerned about tone, in a hearing that's about Donald Trump's potential threatening of FBI agents nationally, something that most judges have never, ever had to consider, federal judges, they've never had to consider their duty to protect FBI agents nationally. And her worry is the tone.
So that is one of many, many, many signs that she is not up to the task here. I have seen many judges in high-profile matters and seen how they comport themselves. We all just watched Judge Merchan, who is, that is sort of the platonic ideal of the model. Here, there's so much wrong with what she did today, starting with that even if you think these allegations may not be enough to do what the government wants, you would not decide to hear this a month after the allegations are raised. This should have been heard promptly. Second, her comment that was, well, there's nothing about these agents on this case that I need to worry about because I've kept their names private. And the prosecutor said, well, A, that's actually factually not true. Mm-hmm. The names have leaked out, and these names will continue to leak out. And two, that's so myopic because there have been threats against other FBI agents, and you don't think that it's both an effect on other FBI agents and also on these. So, it was both a sort of short-sighted view of in terms of questioning and also factually wrong. So there's just so much that this is consistent with the outrage in the way that she has handled this case, as you noted, from the outset, when it was not even an indictment. She has consistently done things that show both her naivete, the fact that she's not ready for prime time, and I hate to say it, but is really showing prejudice in a way that really casts aspersions on very good conservative judges who do their duty.
Well, your tone was okay in the way you said that. It's a harsh, a harsh comment, but the tone was okay. Joyce Vance, what are you expecting here? Because Judge Cannon seems to know when she can create a ruling that Jack Smith will appeal and could possibly shake her grip on the case. So what are you expecting for us to see going forward on this?
So I'm expecting more delay, which is precisely how she's handled this case from the get-go. She doesn't rule. To Andrew's point, she scheduled this hearing just an unconscionably long time after Trump began to make these comments. We won't see a ruling in this case for weeks, if we see one forever. And the reason for that is because these rulings would be immediately appealable if they went against the government. If she were to dismiss the case or limit special counsel's ability to use funding sources, then they would appeal that. And most importantly, this ruling on the change in Trump's conditions of pretrial release is something that by statute the government is entitled to take an immediate appeal of if she denies their motion. And that's exactly where Judge Cannon does not want to be, in front of the 11th Circuit. Again, I think we can't say this enough. She wasn't just reversed 2 times by the Court of Appeals. She entertained a fundamentally flawed action brought by Donald Trump. When you don't like the results of a search warrant in an investigation into your conduct, you wait until you're charged, and then you move to suppress any evidence gained as a result of that search warrant. And that's not what Trump did. He filed a civil action that wasn't justified under any sort of legal proceedings. She entertained it. She delayed the government's use of evidence. That, in large part, is why we're here talking about delay again. And that's what the 11th Circuit responded to so sharply, smacking her down twice. She does not want to be back in front of them.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.